Hey everyone, my name is Dan Bubniak. I'm an EOS implementer, and today we're going to talk about the basics of an accountability chart. So this video is probably helpful for you if you are about to set your first version of the accountability chart, are interested in putting more structure in place or getting clarity on people's roles, or you just set your accountability chart and you want to really come back and understand the tools so that you can make some tweaks, and updates. So we're just going to jump right in. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get going. All right. So when we come in and we put EOS in place, whether you're self-implementing or using an implementer, really we're here to set a big vision, right? We want to set this big, great vision. And the reality is people are at the foundation of that vision. If we don't have great people in our business that are aligned and want to be a part of this vision, everything else will suffer. So we've got to define what a great person looks like in your business. The accountability chart, again, is really the foundation to be able to do that. The next thing I want to say is that, once we have that big vision, we have clarity on who needs to be involved in this business, what are their seats and what are those seats accountable for. We need to be able to measure, are our teams actually executing against that vision? We've got to have some measurements in place. And that's what our other foundational tools, rock setting and the scorecard, is for. It tells us, are we doing the right things with our rocks? And the scorecard tells us, how are we performing? So again, the accountability chart is also the foundation for setting rocks and understanding what each person should be doing, and then measuring success, how we're actually doing within our seat. So without having that clarity in the role, it becomes very difficult to measure, are these roles even successful, or are we moving towards our vision? So the accountability chart really sits at the foundation of everything we do in EOS. Now, when we start and when we build an accountability chart, we've got to start with the basics, right? So before you go in and you build one for your own company, or even if you've built one already for your company, we want to step back and think about the basics, the assumptions of an accountability chart. Once you understand the assumptions, we can then customize this for your business. But the assumptions here are that every great business has to have 3 functions, and these functions have to be strong. The first function is a sales and marketing function, right? This is going out and finding the right types of customers and bringing them into the organizations. It's our revenue function. Once we have that revenue function, we've got to be able to fulfill our obligations to those customers, and that's our operations function. The third major function is finance, which is ultimately, how is cash moving in and out of the business? How are we reporting on financial results? These 3 functions have to be strong in any single business. The fourth function that has to exist is called an integrator function. Now, don't get hung up on, is this a CEO or a general manager or a VP? Doesn't matter, right? You can figure out titles later, but this function has to exist. And this function is the function that harmoniously orchestrates these departments that are sitting beneath, right? So if we're doing our job in the business, sales and marketing should be stretching operations, right? We should be selling, hopefully, more than operations can fulfill. So there's some stretch, there's some tension there. And sometimes vice versa, where ops can handle more than they have, and they're pushing, and there's a little bit of tension between them and the sales department. So there should be tension at these levels as we grow and scale our business. The integrator's job is to make sure we're orchestrating and moving people together, removing obstacles and barriers, holding people accountable, right? If a final decision has to be made, that's the integrator. And if there's any problems, they're kind of running towards the fire and helping put it out. I also like to say the integrator thinks on logic. They're a logical type of person. Now, 50% of the time, there's a fourth function that exists, right? Not always, but 50% of the time, I would say on average, we would see a fifth function, which is the visionary function. This function is the opposite of the integrator in that they are much more of an emotional person, right? They have that emotion. They come off gut a lot of the times. They have big creative ideas. They might have 20 ideas, but one of them is really something that we can actually implement. They change their mind a lot. They're charismatic. Maybe they're great with customers or a culture warrior. That's the visionary, right? The distinction generally that I like to say is the vision is a bit more emotional, where that integrator is logical. So if you have a visionary, you've got to know it, right? You've got to be honest with yourselves that, you know what, I'm not that integrator. Based on the characteristics, the things that I just said, I'm more of a visionary. Because when we have a visionary actually trapped in an integrator seat, and I see this often when we go through this exercise, it's the aha. The visionary is trapped in the integrator seat. It's what creates chaos, right? It creates these spikes of work because the visionary is changing their mind, and the leadership team is getting honestly annoyed. And when there's fires jumping up, the visionaries kind of, running away from it. They don't want to deal with it. So when we see a visionary in the integrator seat, this is where we see those problems. So, again, this is the foundation for an accountability chart. These four functions have to exist: the sales, marketing, operations, and finance seat, as well as the integrator. And 50% of the time, we'll see that additional function, which is the visionary function. What we'll do after this is we've got to then customize this for your organization. Now, we're going to customize it in a couple of ways. But, when we go into this customization process, we've got to think structure first, people second. So I don't care who is on your team. I don't care who's in the room. I don't care what functions exist or what titles exist. We've got to think, structure first. What is the right structure for the business? And when we ask that question, we're going to be looking forward 6 to 12 months. So the first question you want to answer is, do we have a visionary, right? Based on those characteristics that I described, do we actually have a visionary? That allows us to understand what we're working with. In the case that we do, that'll provide much more clarity around who that visionary is and how the organization and how this leadership team needs to operate moving forward. So we're going to customize this in two ways. First, at that leadership team level, right? So those three core functions, we want to understand what are the core functions in your business. Now, this is an example of a custom leadership team, right? In this example, this leadership team, when they said, what is the right structure looking forward 6 to 12 months? They said the sales and marketing seat needs to be split out. These are two distinct functions, two different functions that we need as centers of influence looking forward. They also said operations is actually split into two distinct functions, two distinct seats on our leadership team. And the third thing was finance. Now, this is again where we're customizing. What are the centers of influence for our business? This is the leadership team that is coming and setting strategy. They're coming and meeting weekly and having discussions about, accountability and what we're working on and what matters. So this is what I like to call your centers of influence. And this really matters because these are the conversations that are dominating your headspace. So for example, if you decided we wanted to put an HR person on the leadership team, right? There's not one in this example, but if we wanted to raise an HR seat up, the HR seat, we're going to be having more conversations about HR items, right? You might be talking about succession planning or compensation plans. So the question you have to ask yourself, are those the right conversations we should be having at the leadership team level when we're looking forward 6 to 12 months? Because that's what we're deciding is the center of influence. So that's how I want you to think about building this first layer, your leadership team layer. What is the right centers of influence, the right functions as we look out 6 to 12 months? The second place you are going to customize, once you've got the right structure at the leadership team level, you're going to customize this. You're then going to define what are the 5 roles of each of these seats. Not 10, not 20, right? We've got to simplify. We've got to really distill each of these seats down to what do they have to deliver to the business? What are they accountable for? When we do this, this provides clarity, right? So people aren't pointing fingers anymore saying, I didn't know I was accountable for that. Now, the first bullet point of any seat that manages people is called LMA, which stands for Lead, Manage, Accountable. That's the first bullet of any seat that manages people. Because often we'll see, when people go through their bullets, they'll put a bunch of management things like performance reviews or hiring or, one-on-ones. All of that stuff is considered leading, managing, and holding people accountable. So we really throw that under one umbrella. So if you're managing people, LMA is the first bullet point. Now, as I mentioned, it's very common, the first time you do this, or even, after the first couple of times you do this, it's very easy to get to 10 bullet points, to 15 bullet points. Again, I want to reemphasize here, we are not building a job description. We are not putting down like every single little task that each role does. This is confusing. If you look at these 10 bullet points, I don't know if I'm in this seat. I do not know what I have to actually accomplish. I don't know what the outcomes are that are expected of me. So we really want to evolve that, right? If you've done this already and you have the bullet points and they're vague or you have too many, we want to distill it down to 5 and we want to evolve them to be much more output focused. You want to say, what is the purpose behind all of these steps? An easy way to get an answer to this is at the end of the day, this seat is responsible for X, right? For blank. What are they accountable for? So an example here in operations, rather than manufacture orders and schedule labor and supply chain. These are all vague things. We say shipping all orders on time and on budget, right? That is much more clear. At the end of the day, you've got to get all orders on time and on budget. You've also got to drive down materials costs, cost of goods sold. That is your accountability. So we really want to distill this down. And when we distill the seat down really well, it becomes easy to then get a measurable on the scorecard and really understand, is this seat actually performing? So one thing I want to come back to is the concept of LMA. So if you're managing people, that's always your first bullet point. LMA means that you are taking responsibility, right? That the buck stops with you when we are talking about everything people. So this includes if we have people that don't fit our core values, you have to address that, right? Not your manager. It's your job to take responsibility and address values issues. When we have people quality issues, maybe someone that doesn't get it, right? That isn't wired to do that seat well. Somebody who doesn't want the seat that they're in. Someone that doesn't have the training, skills, education. Your job, LMA, that means that you are taking responsibility. You handle your people issues. The buck is going to stop with you. So anything people related, it's on you as the leader to really get in there and address those issues. So if you find yourself complaining about your team, ultimately you're complaining about yourself. So don't do that. Don't complain about yourself. Go out, take responsibility, and address it. All right, once we get that leadership team structure, right? So we've got the structure in place. We know what the right seats are on the bus. And again, we haven't talked about names at this point at all. You're getting the structure in place. What are the right centers of influence? Then we're defining what are the 5 accountabilities of each of these centers of influence. Then you want to push this down throughout the organization and get clarity at all levels. So your accountability chart might look something like this. So now we have clarity, right? What are the right seats on the bus? We've got the right structure looking forward 6 to 12 months. We've distilled down the 5 accountabilities of each of these seats and made sure that they're output focused so people really know what's expected of them. Then we want to start talking names. This is when then we're going to put names in these seats. We'll look at who's in our organization. We'll look at the seats, and then we'll nominate people to put them into those seats. So the tool that is going to allow you to truly understand what great people look like in your business, the term we use for what great people are is the right person in the right seat, is the people analyzer tool. So when we're talking about right people means they are a core values fit, right? They have the DNA of our business. They do business the way that we need to do business. So they are a core values fit. The right seat means if I was going to read the 5 accountabilities of that seat, and I put a name in it, then I would know, does that person get it? Are they wired to do that seat well, right? Do they have the aptitude to do that seat well? Do they want it? Do they actually want the 5 accountabilities in the seat? And this is, shadily, I see it often where people actually, if you distill those 5 accountabilities down, they actually don't want it. And if they don't want it, they're going to be phoning it in and you're going to be picking up their accountability. So that'll hurt you in the long run. And the third is the capacity. Do they have the technical skills, the training, the education, the emotional intelligence to do that job well, right? Like I like to say, if you're in a sales seat, you probably need to like people and you probably need to be comfortable getting a bunch of no's. That's the capacity. Do they have the capacity to do that seat well? So the people analyzer tool, when you're putting names in seats or when you're assessing your accountability chart, this tool is going to objectively tell you where you have people issues. So you can see here, we're setting a bar on our core values. What is the minimum expectations of each of these folks against our core values? So, I'm not going to go too deep into this. I'll make another core values video, but a plus means that somebody displays that value most of the time. A plus minus means sometimes, and a minus means rarely, right? So we're going to set a bar. What is acceptable? We need everybody in our business to be at or above the bar in core values. And with get it, want it capacity, you're going to then, as you put the name in the seat, you're going to read the 5 bullets and honestly answer the question, do they get it? Do they want it and have capacity to do those 5 roles well? Now, when you go through this exercise, your people issues are going to jump out at you. It's going to become very obvious where your issues are. And what we tend to see is 2 distinct issues when you go through this exercise. First is you have the right person in the wrong seat, right? So you're going to see, let's see, do we have an example here of that on this chart? We don't here, but the right person in the wrong seat means We have somebody who fits our core values, right? So they're at the bar of our core values. They do business the way that we need to do business, but they're not in the right seat, right? So they've failed somewhere in the get it, want it, and have capacity test, right? They're not in the right seat. So the good news is, when you go through the accountability chart exercise, a lot of the times the other seats on the bus will be open. And if you have someone that fits your core values, they could be, an option to get them into another seat, assuming they're in the right seat in that seat. Now, on the opposite, sometimes we'll see somebody, and this is the hardest issue to deal with in business, in my opinion. You'll see the wrong person in the right seat, meaning this is somebody who actually does that job really well. They can get those 5 accountabilities done, but they are not a core values fit. And in this instance, you're so hesitant to move on from them because they're doing their job well, right? You might have a rock star salesperson who just does not fit into your business, right? Doesn't do business the way that you do business. And so you struggle to move on from them, but they start destroying your culture, right? When they're not displaying your values, other people see that. And then other people begin to not display your values. And then that begins to spread into other parts of the business. And all of a sudden, a year goes by, 2 years go by, and you look at your team, you say, how did we get here? Why is nobody in this business displaying the values of the things that made our business successful in the first place? That's what happens when you allow the wrong people into your business. So you have to have both right people, right seats. This tool will tell you objectively where you don't have that. And then you can use this tool to just sit down with the person that maybe not be, displaying those values. Sit down with them, have a conversation on where they're missing the mark and get them there. Or if they can't get there, it'll help bring clarity that it's time to move them out. So again, our job is to make sure that we have both the right people in the right seats. So you're going to put names in those seats. You're going to pull up your people analyzer tool, and you're going to make sure that they are a right person in the right seat by filling out that people analyzer tool. And at the end of the day, if we distill any leader's job down, right, the 90% of the job, honestly, it could be 100% of the job, is to make sure that you have the right people, right seats on your team. You'll always have to be on a journey to make sure that you have that. And your business is going to evolve. Your team is going to evolve. So using this accountability chart tool, consistently looking at your structure, and then using your people analyzer to assess, do I have the right people in the right seat, is the most unemotional, objective way to understand where your gaps are and address those gaps over time. So those are that's the basics of the accountability chart. So if you're setting one up for the first time, hopefully this was helpful. If you've done this already, come back to this. This is a good refresher of the foundation of how to use this tool and why it matters. But the tips I want to leave you with is, when you're going through this exercise, be objective, right? People are emotional, right? That's why it's really hard to make changes, because there's a lot of emotion behind it. So be objective. Always think structure first. The second thing is, this tool is all about creating clarity within the business. So we want the manager and that direct report to be able to articulate with 100% clarity and agreement on what somebody's role is. If you don't have 100% agreement on what the role is, someone's never going to live up to the expectations. So let's get 100% clarity on the roles. The third thing is, you have to understand this is dynamic. You will fill out this accountability chart and you may feel it's right, but if you double your business, or if you even grow 10% or 20% or contract, your accountability chart is going to change. So you have to understand this is dynamic, use the tool as if it's dynamic, and assess it quarterly. The fourth thing is, the faster you address your right people, right seat issues, the faster you will grow in a business. So you take this tool seriously, right? Your job as a leader is to always make sure you have right people, right seats. And when you don't, address it. That's what LMA means. And the last thing is, when you are IDSing, and this is something I see often, a lot of the root issues actually stem back from the people component, right? A lot of problems stem back to either having the wrong person or somebody in the wrong seat. And so the accountability chart, when you're IDSing, I just want you to take this little frame of mind. Is this actually a people issue? And if you're uncertain on it, that's when you're going to pull up that accountability chart that's going to hopefully provide some clarity on, is it a people issue or is it not a people issue? So that's the accountability chart. That's what I got for you guys today. If you have any questions, I've left my information, my email at the bottom of that presentation, dan@outpaceenterprises.com. Reach out for help and have a great day.